Iñigo came for me at dawn. He did not knock, he whistled from the street, the way you whistle at a dog or a sheep. A short, sharp whistle that did not admit discussion. He was at the door in his hiking boots, crook in hand, small rucksack on his back. He did not explain where we were going. He began walking uphill and I followed him because in Trasmoz I had learned that explanations come after the facts, not before. We left the village by a path that climbed through home oaks. The home oaks of the Moncayo are low, twisted, with trunks that look like tensed muscles, trees that have spent centuries fighting wind and cold and have decided that surviving matters more than growing. The ground was covered in acorns and dry leaves that crunched under our boots with a sound that reminded me of small bones breaking. At 500 meters of altitude, the home oaks gave way to oaks. Pyrrhian oaks with small leaves, taller than the home oaks but just as gnarled. The fog began to appear among the trunks, not a uniform fog but shreds, like scraps of cloth snagged on the branches. The temperature dropped 2 degrees at once. At 1,000 meters, the oaks vanished and the beeches began. I was not prepared for the beeches. The beech forest of Peña Roya is an anomaly. An Atlantic wood at 1,200 meters of altitude in the middle of dry Spain. It should not exist. Beech forests need constant humidity, acid soils, mild temperatures. All of that is in Asturias, in Cantabria, in the Pyrenees. Not in Aragon. But the Moncayo traps the clouds that come from the Cantabrian Sea and rings them over its northern face, creating a microclimate that resembles nothing around it. A green island in a sea of steppe. Beeches are the most beautiful trees that exist. I say this with the objectivity of someone who is not a botanist but who has eyes, smooth trunks of a silvery grey that look like marble columns, canopies that in spring form a continuous ceiling of translucent leaves and in October turn copper, gold, red. The floor of the beech forest was covered in fallen leaves that formed a damp, springy carpet that absorbed footsteps until they became almost inaudible. The light entered filtered, greenish, as in a submerged cathedral. Walking through the beech forest was walking through somewhere else. The crunch of dry leaves from the oak wood gave way to the soft silence of moss, which swallowed footsteps, erasing the trace of any intruder. The temperature dropped several degrees at once, not the dry cold of altitude but something damp, enveloping, a cold that got inside you. And the smell changed. Outside the beech forest it smelled of Mediterranean scrub, thyme, rosemary, dry earth. Here it smelled of something Atlantic, of peat and wet bark, a smell that made no sense at this longitude and this latitude, as if the beech forest had imported its own atmosphere. I had the feeling of crossing a threshold, not physical, not visible, but as real as a door. Something that separated the world out there from the world in here. And the silence. Not the silence of Trasmoz, which was full of invisible people. A different silence. Older. A silence from before villages, before churches, before words. The silence of a forest that has been existing for thousands of years and simply watches civilizations appear and vanish at its feet. Iñigo stopped in a clearing. Not a natural clearing, a circular space where the beeches stood apart as if something had pushed them from the center. The diameter was about 20 meters. The ground, instead of leaves, was short grass and moss. And in the exact center, a flat, rectangular stone the size of a dining table, covered in lichen. This is where the Nemeton was, said Iñigo. The what? The sacred grove. The Celtiberians had open-air temples. They didn't build buildings, they used forest clearings. The Nemeton was the place where they spoke to the mountain. They spoke to the mountain? Iñigo sat on the stone. He pulled a sandwich from his rucksack. He broke it in half and offered me one. My grandmother says that beneath the Moncayo there's something that sleeps. That it has always slept. That the Celtiberians knew and came here to sing to it so it would keep sleeping. Like a mother singing to a child. He fell silent. He chewed. He looked at the beeches the way someone decides how much to tell. Iñigo was not the kind who talks for the sake of talking. He released each sentence the way a shepherd releases a sheep, only when he is sure it will go to the right place. And what happened when they stopped singing? The Romans came. They put a temple to Jupiter on the summit. They didn't sing but they prayed, and prayer served just the same. Then the monks came. They built Veruela. They prayed day and night, shifts of perpetual prayer. The mountain slept. He paused. He finished his half of the sandwich. He wiped his hands on his trousers. And then the excommunication cut the sacred bond with Trasmoz. It cut the whole bond, he said. Neither pagan nor Christian. Like cutting the electricity to a house. Nothing works. Nothing gets through. Trasmoz became a dead spot. He fell silent again. He looked at the beeches. He scratched the back of his neck with the slowness of someone searching for the exact words in a language he does not master, the language of explaining things you know with the body, not the head. The Moncayo is like a beast that sleeps, he said at last. Big. Old. And the sacred is like a fence. As long as the fence is whole, the beast sleeps inside and nothing happens. Another pause. He looked at his hands as though the instructions were written in the calices. The excommunication opened a breach in the fence. And with nothing to fill the breach, the beast stirs. It grows restless. It looks for the way out. And the dead? The dead are the stones you pile in the gap when you don't have time to mend the fence. It's not a wall. It's not a barrier. But it fills. It blocks the wind. The beast can't see what's on the other side and it lies down again. And the dead filled the void. Iñigo looked at me. For the second time since I had known him, I felt he was truly seeing me not as an outsider, not as a nuisance, but as someone who was understanding what he had spent his whole life trying to explain without finding anyone to explain it to. The dead are like wool in a wall, he said. Insulation. They don't know they are. They don't do it on purpose. They're simply there, and by being there, they fill the gap. As long as the gap is filled, whatever is beneath the Moncayo doesn't sense that there's something sacred nearby. It doesn't stir. It goes on sleeping. And if they're removed, the Moncayo and Veruela are face to face. The sacred and the other. With nothing in between. He did not finish the sentence. The ground of the clearing made a dull sound, not a tremor, a sigh, as if the mountain had heard what Iñigo was saying and agreed. What is it that's down there? Iñigo stood. He brushed off the crumbs. He looked at the summit of the Moncayo, invisible behind the clouds, and spoke with the voice of someone who lives alongside a mystery he has stopped trying to solve. I don't know. My grandmother doesn't know either. Nobody knows. But 8 years ago, when my grandfather died, the mountain trembled. 1 second. Like a shiver. As if it had noticed there was one more dead person in the village and that had calmed it a little. As if the dead were lulling it to sleep. Iñigo pointed to a spot on the other side of the clearing. Between two beeches, where the fog was thickest. My grandfather is sitting there. Has been for 8 years. He used to sit on the bench in the village square, but he says it's more peaceful up here. I saw nothing. 2 beeches, fog, moss. But Iñigo was speaking while looking over there with the naturalness of someone pointing out an acquaintance across the street. Does he talk to you? Not with words. He makes gestures. He points at things. Sometimes he warns me about storms, points north, and I know it'll rain in 2 hours. He's more accurate than the weather service. I knelt beside the flat stone in the center of the clearing. I placed my hands on the moss. I do not know why I did it. It was a gesture that already felt familiar. The faithful kneel in churches, children kneel to hear stories. I knelt in the ravine of Tia Casca. Kneeling is lowering yourself to the level of what you want to understand. The stone was warm, not like the door of the bedroom. More subtle. 1 degree, perhaps 2, above what the stone should be in October at 1400 meters of altitude. But it was there. Unmistakable. Heat. Coming from below. From beneath the stone, beneath the moss, beneath the earth, beneath the rock. And then the ground trembled. Not an earthquake. A shiver. Exactly as Iñigo had said, something enormous turning in its sleep. 1 second of gentle vibration that I felt in my palms, in my knees, in my teeth. 1 second that went as quickly as it came and left the clearing the same as before, silent, beautiful, wreathed in fog. But something had changed. Not in the clearing. In me. Because now I knew. I did not believe I knew. With the certainty that comes not from arguments but from the senses. Beneath this mountain there was something alive. Something that slept. Something the Celtiberians had tucked in with songs and the monks with prayers and the dead of Trasmoz with their silent presence. Something that Fermín, with his infinite compassion and his unbreakable faith, was about to leave without a blanket. I looked at Iñigo. He was looking at me. But not the way he always looked at me, with that tired patience of someone explaining something to someone who is not going to understand. Now he was looking at me differently. With something it took me a moment to recognize because I had not expected it from him. Relief. The enormous, quiet relief of someone who has carried something alone for 30 years and suddenly discovers that another person can at least feel the weight, even if she cannot lift it. He said nothing. He did not need to. He nodded once, briefly, with his chin, the way you greet an equal. And I understood that this minimal gesture was the closest thing to a confession Iñigo was capable of making. We left the clearing. We descended to the village in silence. The fog followed us to the oak woods and stayed there, as if it did not want to go further down. At the entrance to Trasmoz, Iñigo stopped. He was looking at the streets with an expression I had not seen on him before, tenderness. Like a shepherd looking at his flock at the end of the day and counting to make sure none is missing. "Are they all still here?" I asked. "All of them. The usual ones and the ones that went up the mountain this morning. They've come back now. 200 and some, he had told me the last time. 200 dead for 88 living. And in 7 days, if Fermín had his way, the 200 would have the option to leave at once. And the Moncayo would wake." I thought of the Vega of 2 weeks ago. The one who had arrived in Trasmoz with a publishing contract and 24 years of emotional hangover. The one who did not believe in anything that would not fit in an article. I did not feel that I had changed my mind, I felt that my eyes had adjusted. The way you enter a dark room and at first see nothing and then, little by little, the furniture appears. It was always there. You just needed time to see it. What I now saw, what I now knew, was not new. It was old. Old as the beeches, old as the warm stone in the clearing. I was the new thing. The only thing that had changed was my capacity to look. I had to talk to Fermín. I had to explain. I had to convince a man of faith that compassion, sometimes, is the worst of threats.